you very much. Now, I'm very pleased to see that the egg timer I brought in has stayed here.
Only used a couple times.
Only had to be used a couple of times, but as a Virgo, I'm going to be setting it for my 10 minutes, and so we'll see how well I do on this. And anyone who comes after me can feel free to continue using them. Thank you very much to the Princeton Library for allowing us all to be here. It's been a fascinating afternoon, and I'm particularly pleased to see so many young writers here. Some of us, I think, fear that writing and publishing is taking a nosedive, so we're delighted to see so many young folks here. I wondered what I might read today, but I thought, I'm actually going to read from Radiant City, but I did want to talk just briefly really about why writers write. I think that for most fiction writers, we tend to write about the things we need to make sense of. What's obsessing us, what's bothering us, what's driving us slightly loony. And so for each of my books, there has been a theme in that time of my life that's been driving me just slightly mad. My husband might say more than slightly mad, but we'll go with slightly mad. And for The Stubborn Season, which was the first novel I wrote, it was how does someone who has grown up in a family with mental illness survive or not the tyranny of that sort of illness? And I can't imagine why I wrote that. We're all such close friends. I can admit that perhaps there was just a smidgen of mental health problems in my family. And then for this novel, The Radiant City, this I wrote just after 9/11. And I was really trying to figure out how people respond to violence, and how, after a catastrophic disillusionment, whether or not it was possible to maintain a compassionate heart in the world, or whether we were doomed to cynicism. And so it's set in Paris, where I was living at the time. Largely it takes place in the Arab quarters of Paris. And none of us who lived in Paris during those years were surprised when there were riots in the Arab quarter. Things were not great for Arabs living in France at the time, perhaps not so much now either. But I created a character who was a war correspondent, somebody who had seen a lot of the horrific events of the past several decades, and who finally in Rwanda had a terrible nervous breakdown. As I'm sad to say, many of the journalists I knew had breakdowns after Rwanda, simply because of the mass of the horror that they saw there, and the fact that no one came. We were all too busy watching O.J. Simpson trial on CNN, I think, during that time, unfortunately. But that was the genesis for this book. And while I was in Paris, there was a priest at the American Cathedral in Paris who said that cynicism is the last refuge of the brokenhearted. And that really stayed with me, and it became the epigram for this book. So the other thing that fascinates me, not sort of general obsessions, but when it comes to characters, I'm always interested in why characters do what they do. What's the initiating incident in a life? Why does a character become who he's going to become? And so I'm going to start the reading with really the first chapter to the book, which is about Matthew Bowles, who is the main character in this book, and it's about something that happens in his childhood that determines why he becomes a war correspondent, why he does any of the rest of the things that happen in the book. So I shall continue. Chapter 1. The night is the wrong color. The first sound he heard was the horses. They sounded like eagles torn apart, like metal gears stripping, like speared whales. Matthew ran to the window. The barn was firelit from within, and orange tongues flickered up almost gently from the roof. His parents and his brother were already in the yard. His father strained to keep his mother from running headlong into the inferno. She twisted and turned in her husband's grip, and Matthew knew there would be bruises up and down her arms tomorrow. Her cries mingled with the horses' cries. Ashes rose and swirled in the heated air. Hellish snowflakes. If he had wanted to, Matthew could have caught them on his tongue. Everything made sense then. The kerosene can, the rags, his father's flustered irritation, his sharp, "Nothing, you hear, I'm doing nothing," when Matthew asked him what he was up to yesterday in the tack room. Matthew ran down the stairs and out the door to his mother's side and saw what she saw inside that burning barn. The horses' manes flashed and shriveled, their teeth bared, their hooves flailed at the flames, the skin crisped, going black along their backs, chained in their stalls while the hay went up all around them, so hot they burned, denied even the cruel blessing of suffocation. Matthew stood his ground, faced his father, and pointed his finger. He said what he knew. Matthew's mother broke away from her husband and turned to her son. She slapped him in the face, so hard he fell to the ground. She had never hit him before, and his shock left him speechless. "Shut your mouth," she said. "You're lying. Don't ever say that again. You're lying." Matthew looked up from the ground at her tear-streaked face, the skin so bright in the fire spray that she might have been burning. In her scalded eyes, he saw she knew the truth, and that it made no difference, and that she would not forgive him for it. She would not forgive his father either, but she would stay nonetheless, even if it killed her, which it would. His father stood fierce in his power, fierce in his victory. He did not smile. There was no need to hide anything behind smiles. His brother took their mother by the arm and led her into the house. "We'll call the fire department," he said. His father stared into the collapsing barn. "Go telling tales on me, will you little shite? All right then, let's see where that gets you." Matthew pressed his face into the dust and begged the dust to swallow him, the ash to bury him, and nothing was the same after that. And I'll read just a little bit now. Obviously, time has moved forward. Matthew is an adult. He's been to Rwanda. He's been to Israel after Rwanda, where the very bad thing happened. That's capital V, capital B, capital T, which I will not tell you about because that's part of the mystery of the book. But he's come to Paris, and there he's going to try and figure out what he'll do with the rest of his life. And so we'll begin with him in Paris. The Place de Dublin is not a particularly pretty square, and it is in a small corner of the 8th arrondissement behind the Gare Saint-Lazare, where there isn't a single tourist attraction. The Primavera Bistro on the corner sets up red tables and chairs and yellow umbrellas beneath the poplars whenever there is the least hope of suitable weather. There is also a green fountain that, like the quality of this morning's light, pleases him. There is something about the miniature temple, with its steady streams of water flowing over the upturned arms of the goddesses, simplicity, temperance, charity, and goodness, that gives Matthew hope. The sunlight sparkling in the water is like laughter, transmuted at this distance from sound to shards of prismatic encouragement. Matthew has seen a great deal of light in his travels around the world, and he has come to the conclusion that it has different properties in different places. The harsh glare of a frozen ice field, the sweet veil in a bamboo thicket, the distortion of distance and depth that follows a thunderstorm when the sun's rays stab under the skin of cloud, the threatening gloom of a darkening prison cell. Light takes on the characteristics of the objects in its path, and this, he has come to believe, is what humans do as well. Light can blind as well as reveal. It can save someone who wanders too close to an unseen edge, but it can just as easily betray a person cowering in a hidden place. He has concluded that, contrary to what religious imagery would try to persuade the populace, light is neutral and indifferent. The wounds in his body have closed over, and physically, Matthew is as good as he's going to get. The mind is another matter. Diagnoses have been assigned: post-traumatic stress disorder, nervous exhaustion. Still, the practical problem exists regardless of mental fragility. If you want to eat, you must have money. In a flurry of demented activity back in the United States the month before, he sold everything he owned. It put some money in the bank, but depressingly little. If he wants more, he must write the book. The book. People see, and people know. And so what? They do not care. They cannot care. It would rock their view of the world too much. People think that if it's true what he and others like him have to say about the world, then the world is too horrible, too terrifying to continue living in. And so they look, but do not see, hear, but do not listen, know, but do not admit. Admit, to let in, to permit access to, like light. Thank you very much.